Hello, edTPA students. I hope you're doing well. I want to talk to you today about something that I mention a lot in my videos. It's called the subject-specific emphasis, and oftentimes in my materials, I refer to it just simply as the SSE. So one of the questions I get a lot is, what is this thing you're talking about, Mamaw? We don't know what this is. So that's where we're going to talk today. Um, writing the edTPA, I get a lot of questions. People want to know, okay, where do I start? Well, this is what you think the edTPA is, but this is what it really is. And, when you think about that, it looks pretty disorganized, but when you think about it in a classroom, things kind of happen simultaneously. And so that's sort of where we are. So it's sometimes hard to describe things in the linear aspect that you would like. One of our goals for this today is to learn where we get the term subject-specific emphasis, to identify it in each of your handbooks, to see how it is present throughout the edTPA, and ways that you can that other professors could use it in their coursework, and ways that students can use it to check their work for edTPA. So in the edTPA handbooks, in your templates, in your prompts, in your rubrics, all of them are very, very similar. The questions are alike. The prompts are alike. The rubrics are very much alike. They're organized in the same way. But there's some specific differences that have to do with your subject. So if you're PE, if you're history, if you're math, whatever. So each handbook has an emphasis that comes from the essential nature of the discipline in which you teach. And this pedagogical emphasis is the foundation for the edTPA. So I believe it's very important to understand about subject-specific emphasis in the beginning. Now, this subject-specific emphasis is stated throughout your edTPA, but it's introduced generally on page 1. I found it on page 2 for SPED, and it's in the rubrics. Teacher candidates and their instructors and coaches and people who are working with them need to pay special attention to this subject-specific language that's in the handbook, and be sure to address all the stuff that comes up in those bulleted lists. So for the sake of consistency, a colleague and I began referring to these as the SSE. And that just made it easy. So from here on, I'm not going to try to say subject-specific emphasis. That's just too many syllables for poor old Mamaw. We're going to stick with SSE. Okay. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing here. Here we go. Okay, yeah, I know. You're like, you got to be kidding me. I get it. I promise you I get it. It's really pretty easy to find. If you'll open up your handbook and turn to around page 15, it's not the same. It's not a magical number. All the handbooks are different, but around there, you're going to find your first rubric. And you see those bulleted items that most of you have? Now, I know I've got other things highlighted. Ignore that for now. But see these bulleted items? Those are the SSE. So this is the History and Social Studies Handbook for Secondary Ed. And so their SSEs are concepts. They're actually facts and concepts. Inquiry, interpretations, analysis, building and supporting arguments or conclusions. So basically the basis of a good history lesson is going to be built upon facts and concepts, the students using inquiry, interpretations, or analysis, and building and supporting arguments and conclusions. That might not be in every lesson, but it should be in every learning segment. Early childhood. Let's find yours. Yours is not quite as obvious, but it's found again in the overview of your assessment in the handbook. The learning segment should include developmentally appropriate practices that intentionally promote the active and multimodal nature of young children's learning and language and literacy development in an interdisciplinary context. That's what you have to keep in mind throughout your segment. Why this having trouble getting this thing to advance like it's supposed to. Of course, it advances when I don't want it to. For this assessment, for an English language arts, for example, theirs is that they should provide opportunities for students to use textual references to construct meaning from, interpret, or respond to complex text, and create a written product, interpreting or responding to complex features of a text that are just beyond your students' current skill levels. That's where you're going with yours. So, this is the SPED. We'll plan 3 to 5 consecutive lessons. Each lesson will have an objective. It goes on, support the focused learner to access the content, align, reflect. We'll come back to that in a minute. These are all the ones that I have found. I actually have probably some others. And that I haven't put in here. But if you want to stop and take a screenshot, this might help you. Move my picture out of the way. I don't know where to put me. Visual arts, world languages. World languages is very different from everybody's, of course. Everyone's is, but some of them seem very different. For example, like school librarian, they write theirs on one of something called their 6 foundations. So that's all very different. Elementary literacy. Yours is really weird because you pick your own. So what you do to choose your subject-specific emphasis is that you have to establish your central literacy strategy and one or more related skill. Now, the way to find that is that you need to look in the back of your understanding rubric level progressions where there's an appendix A, and you'll see on the left there'll be listed essential literacy strategies, and on the right you'll see related skills. And you need to choose one essential literacy strategy and at least one related skill. Special ed, let's take a look at this. All right. Okay, so your learning segment has to be designed to support the focused learner, and to give them access to the content related to a learning goal to demonstrate their learning. It needs to align with at least one goal in the IEP, and if it's relevant, then you need the academic a standard that you're working on, or non-academic standard. It may not be relevant to what you're doing, so you're going to support their learning. You're going to align with one goal of the IEP, at least one. And you need to make sure that you reflect the IEP identified adaptations. either for the learning environment, the content, instructional strategies, or assessments. So, in other words, you're going to support, align, and adapt. So these are the things you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about the supports, the alignment, and the adaptation. So let's talk about how all of the SSE connect throughout your edTPA. In most handbooks, the rubrics that have the SSE are rubric 1, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 15. That's a little different for world language because world language has 13 rubrics rather than 15. So in rubric 1, how do you plan for the SSE? Rubric 5, how do you plan to assess all the SSE? 7, how do you engage students in learning SSE? How do you deepen student learning of the SSE? It's a little different here, engagement and deepening their learning. Rubric 9, oh, this is so content specific. Everybody has to look at their own. Basically, it has to do with some specific types of strategies that are considered to be best practices in your particular content area. And then rubric 15, next steps. So your next steps need to be connected to the SSE. Rubrics for special ed, they're very much the same. Planning your assessment. So first of all, you're planning the alignment and development of knowledge and skills. Then you're planning the assessments. You're engaging the focus learner. You're deepening their learning. And then you're supporting learning. And then you're planning next steps. Okay, this handy dandy little thing is going to show you how it all connects. So first of all, in rubric 1, that we know from reading all of that all of our SSE must be included in the learning segment. So if you are teaching history and you've got those 3 bulleted items that I showed you on rubric 1, all 3 of those have to be present in your learning segment. Not every lesson, but in the segment, okay? So all of your objectives, you should be able to say objective 1 is which SSE. Objective 2, every time you write an objective, it needs to be related to an SSE. And that brings us to assessments, because rubric 5 assesses the objectives and therefore will assess and monitor the progress of all SSE. So you need clear alignment between the objectives, the SSE, and your assessments. It's very essential that you assess all of your SSE. So if your literacy and your SSE are your essential literacy strategy and your related skills that you came up with, make sure that you are planning to sometime during that learning segment assess all of them. Okay, so how does this get this to rubric 15? Well, rubric 15 says that you must describe next steps that target the skills of the subject-specific emphasis for individuals and groups. Sorry, my computer's slow today. So going forward into the next unit, how can I help the students with the SSE that they're struggling with? So you've assessed the SSE, you're going to analyze an assessment based on the SSE, and now you're going to say, okay, did my students, do they do really well with facts and concepts? And do they do really well with building arguments, but not so great maybe with interpretation? So that's what you think about when you think about your next steps. Okay, now rubric 1 is associated with rubric 7. If you can remember, here we're thinking about the objectives and how they're aligned with the subject-specific emphasis. And so it's essential to plan activities that show students engaged in the SSE. So not only do you have to show student engagement with Rubric 7, but they have to be engaged in something particular. Now, remember, engagement does mean passive engagement. It means active engagement. So they're not engaged in listening, for example. They need to be engaged, as in doing something. Also, Rubric 1 sets us up for success in Rubric 8, because if you are thinking about your lessons and how your objectives relate to the SSE, it's very essential to plan specific questions that are going to deepen the understandings of the subject-specific emphasis. So your video evidence will need to be of you eliciting student responses. Well, you elicit student responses. That's just a really fancy way of saying ask questions. I don't know why they don't say just ask questions, but I don't know. That eliciting student responses that deepen their understanding. So it digs deeper. You know, those questions that dig deeper. That's what you want there. And let's look at Rubric 9. It's important in the planning commentary that you plan for Rubric 9 as well. In Rubric 9, you're going to need video evidence of whatever subject-specific pedagogy is set aside for your content. Everyone needs to look at Rubric 9. If you are world language, that is going to be Rubric 8. And this is very, very important because, for example, in math, you have to have video evidence of students using representations. Science, yours is very interesting. You should go and look at it because that's got to get recorded. You want to make sure you got that recorded. So this is how they all connect. My next video will be on using the subject-specific emphasis to understand Task 1. And so we will be back. I've got going to create a video for Task 1, Task 2, and Task 3. So we'll be talking about this topic a lot. And I hope you have a really good day and hang in there.